Hey everyone, this is Kevin with Garrison Dental Solutions, and I am not the handsome man at the top of your screen. that is Dr. Matt Burton, good friend and colleague, and he is actually going to be doing a lot of the speaking here tonight, unlike what you usually hear from me. But as we get started, I just wanted to run through a couple of things with you, just as a reminder that tonight's event is not for CE credit. We're introducing a new product, and it's really not appropriate for us to offer CE credit for that. But we are going to be talking definitely about techniques and some really exciting changes to technique that are going to hopefully really offer all of the clinicians a real opportunity to up their game when it comes to more complex restoration. So Dr. Matt, could you flip to the next slide for me?
Sure can.
Okay, so we're going to talk first. Dr. Bird's going to tell us a little bit of the story about how this happened, because this is kind of an interesting story about Garrison collaboration with clinicians, and then we're going to dive right into what is different because this system. I'm going to tell you something, folks. I've been with Garrison Dental Solutions 26 years, from the old timey plain wire rings to fusion and strategy, and now quad. And I can tell you right now that quad is as different from uh, everything else that is out there, everything that we've done before. It's as different as if we were going from the plain wire rings to fusion for the first time. It is very different and it's very exciting. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on that. We've got some nice cases to show you that Dr. Burton and some other clinicians have done. We'll walk you through the kit so that you can get an idea of what that looks like. And then some of the resources and training that we have available for this specific product. So, with that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Matthew Burton, who is one of the inventors of the system, and certainly of the wedge portion, and a huge collaborator on the construction of the ring. So let's go ahead and turn it over to you, Doc.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I just wanted to show face to say hi, but I'm going to be turning my camera off so it doesn't take up any big portion of your screen. But thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And we certainly hope that you enjoy the new system for those of you that have it already, and excited for those of you who don't have it to learn more and hopefully understand what it's all about and how it came to be. And so essentially, actually, I'm not going to turn my camera off. Oh, there we go. I'll turn it off now. Okay, Kev, am I off now?
You're still there, but let me.
All right,
I think I can.
we're going with it. And so
All right.
we'll roll with it. Um, but
You've got a great
essentially,
face for radio, so don't worry.
I've been told that. No, I'm joking. So this whole concept, the quad and everything you're about to hear, it's such an organic evolution because it came from a place of necessity. So I'm a practicing dentist just south of Chicago, and I've been practicing for almost 17 years. And I was born into the era of, when I graduated dental school, amalgam boards. There was still a huge debate over whether or not posterior composites, every single one of them, caused the root canal, and there was a lot of conflict going on. And at the time, there wasn't much evolution in technology for this. We were still trying to use the old school amalgam materials or tools rather to do what we had to do. And so I've got to walk through that whole evolution of from being a 90% amalgam to 10% composite ratio to now like 99% composite, 1% amalgam. And a lot's changed in 16 years. And our bonding applications are great, our materials are great, and our tools continue to be better. But I noticed that at a certain point, a lot of our tools that we would have, like no matter what ring system, and I had them all, that we would get to a certain type of case and it would flounder and we would struggle. And I would struggle. And so I started to kind of rethink through the individual components of a matrix system, from the matrix band. What does it do? What are its pros? What are its cons? The wedge, same thing. Pros, cons. Where does it struggle? Where does it succeed? Why? and ultimately the ring at the end, and trying to figure out what exactly each component was really doing versus what we thought it was doing, and finding a way to get them to all work together instead of working apart. And there was an interesting article that I'll start with on this before we get into this, that came out about, I want to say maybe like 2 years ago, and it was the British Dental Journal, and they had done this major research on all the different ring systems and all the different sectional systems and all this, and they were comparing it to Tofflemeyer's and all these things. And what they ultimately concluded was that they found an interesting fact that the biggest deficit of struggle in class two composites was that the wedge and the ring, the two most important things really, were actually working against each other, right? So the wedge was pulling the matrix band one way, the ring was pushing it the other. And when you start to think about that, you can kind of start to go to like some bite wing x-rays that you take post-op, and you're wondering why it flosses weird and all that's happening. It was because the two really key components were actually butting heads. And so my goal was to find a way to make it a cohesive relationship and allow the system to work as a unified system and get us what we need and help us instead of hinder us. And so um, it started with that and that thought, and I started working through it. And I met Tom Garrison at a trade show. And so I had started at my own company and started making these wedges because I noticed they were really quite different and quite unique. And I started by splitting wave wedges in half with a scalpel blade to prove my concept, or just actually not even prove it, just to be able to do it in my office. And long before I even started thinking about taking this on as a project or a product, and so I started to realize that it was actually making a huge impact. And um, one thing led to the other. Started my own company, started distributing these wedges, and largely the reason for that was to start to get attention because I wanted to make a change. I could see a difference. And I noticed these wedges would interact with rings in a very interesting way, but it was tricky to do because there wasn't really a ring that was meant to do it. And so I was teaching a show, SmileCon in Las Vegas, and Tom Garrison was in the crowd, and we connected soon after, and we sat down and just started talking. And, he was like, I understand what you're going after. We're going after the same thing. Maybe we should collaborate and figure something out. And so we did, and it went through, quite a bit of engineering, quite a bit of prototyping, quite a bit of trialing, and we'll go into more details on all that later. But this system really ran through the cycle of this, engineering, prototyping, trial, go back to engineering, figure out what went wrong, were we not educating, all that. So we really polished this product as much as we could because Garrison and myself, we really wanted to put something out there that actually made a difference. And what we ended up creating was the quad matrix system.
Now, yeah, they have to imagine the really fun music that goes along with this on Instagram. It's we
Can
have
you
to,
sing for us, Kevin? Can you hum it?
I don't think you want that. I don't think anybody wants that. But yeah,
It's
imagine
so
some hip dance music going on here.
but we're going to go through these individual components and kind of show everyone, what makes it different and why. Um, but it's a pretty cool story how it came to be, and that it was really great. And I think it's amazing that a company like Garrison, who's been around for 25 years, actually, they really care about making things better. It's really fascinating, and they're really committed to innovation. They're committed to making the dentist world better. I mean, there was be meetings we were sitting in, and it's really encouraging that there's companies like this out there that are doing what they're doing because they're really important in making our lives better, our patients' restorations better, all of this. And we'd be in a different place without companies like them. And so, what are the components of the quad system? Well, the first component is one of the major differentiators, and this is the wedge that I was talking about before. And some of you, very few of you, could be familiar with something called the Versa wedge, which is what this was originally called when I first invented it. Now it's called the quad wedge. And the unique feature of this wedge is that it simply splits in half at the end instead of staying in a point. And what I was noticing when I would get into anytime my preparations would step past an ideal state where I had adequate tooth structure at the gingival margin just above just above the papilla, then I would notice that when I would put my matrix bands in, everything would be fine. And then I would put my wedge in, and if there wasn't enough tooth there, my matrix band would pull off my neighbor tooth and it'd start bleeding, and my matrix band would be dented at my margin. And I noticed that it was the wedge step that was causing this. And so what I was seeing was that the papilla was actually interfering with the wedge, right? It was getting in the way. And at the beginning of composite world, integration, it wasn't a huge problem because composites were kind of advertised as conservative. It was more like a slot prep. That's really what we were using them for. But it quickly evolved to pretty much everything we did. So we had to follow wherever the amalgam margin was. We had to follow wherever the caries were. And a lot of times I wasn't ending up, super gingival. I was playing subgingival or deeper in a lot of cases. And that's where my system that I had and what I was using would really start to stumble, and I would have difficulty. And then I was like, well, we're just going to do a crown here and all that. And so this wedge, what it does, its unique ability to split, simply, if you go to this side here, you can see this is like a cross-sectional view. So it allows the wings to kind of sit down in the papilla and allow the main portion or body of papilla to sit in the middle. And so it can seal those edges without lifting the whole wedge up. And if you're not lifting your wedge up, then you're keeping pressure off of your matrix bands near our contact point. Because if the wedge goes up, the matrix band comes off the neighboring tooth, or if you're doing back to backs, it splits it. And that's where we get light contacts and contact issues and even contour issues. And so the wedge, the ability of it to split, it's one of its important features is deep margin situations. Okay. Now, the other feature about it is, and this was discovered by accident when I started just playing with it more in my office, is that whenever I was doing back to back restorations, one of the biggest challenges and the things that would hinder me from doing it was that I couldn't seal both margins at the same time. I could only seal one because the wedge was going through and it was in a linear direction. So oftentimes our teeth are moving in opposite directions, and so are our margins. And so this wedge, it's splitting wings, allow one wing to seal one tooth and the other wing to seal the other tooth. And that wedge will interact, and you're going to see the full quad ring later, but it interacts with this ring that's designed specifically to ensure that split of that wedge for those situations. And what this ends up doing from this view, you can really see, is it actually takes the wing and it'll wrap it around the matrix margin, kind of like a belt around your waist. And so you're just getting a really good seal, and it's contouring your matrix with it because the wedge is attached to the matrix. So it's allowing the matrix to curve with it. And in back-to-back situations, then you get both seals simultaneously, and you get proper matrix and contour formation, which is going to give you a proper contact. And so the quad wedge comes 4 different sizes: small, medium, large, anatomical. The small, medium, large are color coded consistently with previous Garrison wedges. And so you'll be able to pick from those in similar fashion to Fusion and Strategy. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. And then there's a fourth one that's called an anatomical. And we colored it purple because it's my favorite color. Why not?
Why wouldn't we?
What the anatomical has is this little hump or convexity on the outside of it, and that's for irregular or concave root surfaces or irregular anatomies. And it's pretty nifty because it's on a split wing too, so it can dive into concavities in between teeth. And we see this a lot as soon as we get past the gingival margin, those root shapes will take whatever contour they're going to take, and that can be enough of a headache. I mean, that's like a day buster. And so these things are designed specifically to help in those situations. So that's the fourth style. Then we move on to the ring, and the biggest difference with the quad ring, and this was the fun part um, of the design, was that I would see in my office and on Instagram. I'm on dental Instagram all the time, just watching things and seeing what other doctors are doing because it's fun and it's also informative. And a lot of docs were using the old school, like what Kevin was just saying, the old school wire, the bent wire, like Gen 1 Garrison ring, which was a single rod, right, that went down, but they were still using it and getting good results. But one of the problems with that was you know, on one side you could just grab the wedge and pull it over, but the other side would have to sit on top of the wedge, and so the whole thing would tilt. And then you go all the way to Garrison's wonderful evolution of silicone pads and soft face rings, and you come to strategy, which is at the end. And so what we did was we kind of took a blend of both. We took Gen 1, which was the single rod, and that's called the driver tip. And what that's going to do is allow this little shape here to engage the gingival embrasure and split the wedge, and also just get like really, really good seals in an area that's extremely hard to clean up. And the other side is the traditional tunnel shape that we're used to seeing. And so what we discovered is that when you take one of each type of pad, you end up with a really great situation that allows the ring to orient itself properly, and it allows your matrix bands to stay stable. And ultimately, it kind of gave us an advantage in one of the very difficult areas, which is back to backs. And so having the ability of everything to be completely stable and our wedge to seal both margins of the preparations simultaneously, and you have something we call wedge ring synergy. And so at this point, an interesting feature that's happening here is that the wedge and the ring are actually working together. And so that's the whole basis of this. And that's where we've seen, you know, major improvements in outcome and in efficiency and things like that, is that the two are now actually working together instead of independently, or more often separately or apart. And so it's a really interesting and exciting new product that really makes a difference. And it allows, ultimately, what has allowed me to do, because I've been using it for some time in the prototyping phase and how we were prototyping this and clinically and on dentiforms and changing this and testing that, is that it's allowed me to expand my horizons on what I do for direct restoration. So, you know, in other words, like sometimes I would see something and just be like, no, I'm not going to fuss with that. Like it needs to be a crown, and the patient's sitting there, you know, begging me to do it. And I'm not saying go crazy, but it's allowed me to do more directs and to do more with directs and to do it more efficiently, more predictably, more confidently. And that's where the system is really excelled for me personally and other doctors, which we will get to as well. Now the quad ring comes in it right and left pairs. So you can imagine that we have now one side, we have an asymmetrical ring. And so one side is the driver tip and the other side's what we're used to, right? And so the universal size is the blue here, and that is used for about, I use it in my office. It does about 90% of what I do. The yellow is the taller, which you can see here, and that's I use for ring stacking or for someone with taller clinical crowns. But I found that the universal is highly effective for almost everything that I do. And those come in a right-handed and a left-handed configuration. Okay, so that driver tip that we were discussing earlier here is marked on the top of the ring by this black arrow. And so when you're looking down on top of the ring, you'll see a black arrow, and that's going to tell you which side the driver tip is on. And so you'll see these different pairs where the driver tip's on the left side, driver tip's on the right side, and vice versa for these two different sizes of rings. And just to give everyone a rule of thumb, kind of the original thought with this was, if you look at the teeth from the occlusal view, the embrasure size, shape, and everything on the buccal versus the lingual or palatal is different. On the buccal, most of the time. It's kind of flatter and less, it's not as deep, it's shallow. And then you go to the lingual, and then you have those bicuspids, that bicuspid molar interface, the bicuspid canine interface. It's a sharp V. And so the original thought with this was that, okay, the traditional pad, which is the tunnel, goes on the buccal because it does well there. And then this new driver tip, which can really engage into the sulcus, and in that deeper embrasure, would go on the palate or the lingual. And so that's kind of the rule of thumb that we've kind of created and stuck with to give people a guide on how to use it. And you'll have these, there's kits, these are included in the kits. There's like a diagram, a laminated card that can show your assistants and you quickly. You just hold the ring up to it and you can figure out if you're working on number 3 DO, then you know what ring you have to use. If you're working on 19, they're going to know what ring to use. I want to say though is that you can flip that around. You can put the driver tip on the buckle as well. And so there's a certain freedom with this system too, which is really nice, and that's intentional because I'm a practitioner too. I just came from work an hour ago. And so I had a long day in the office. So I like flexibility with things. I like the ability to use things kind of however I need to use them. And so there is flexibility in this system. So it doesn't always have to be that the driver tip goes on the lingual, but for rule of thumb and like inherent purposes, we just kind of give people a guide to start with. And then the matrix bands that are included, again, I like variety. No class 2 is the same, right? So we need different matrix bands for depending on how the teeth are contoured, depending on if we have a tight embrasure, depending on if we need the matrix to be rigid and stable, or we need something that we can glide in. And so there's 2 different types of matrix bands that we included in the kits. One is a firm band, and despite it being firm, it is literally one of the skinniest matrix bands or thinnest matrix bands that Garrison makes. Is that right, Kevin?
Yes, yes, it is. It's a common misconception that the firm bands are thicker. Thickness is not what makes them firm. It's the temper of the stainless steel.
And the
So
cool thing about these firm bands that Garrison's made is that they hold their posture really well. And so when you get into back-to-back situations, you don't want 2 matrix bands that can like kind of bully each other around. You want something that's going to sit in there and hold itself up and hold its contour very well. And they're fantastic. And so we recommend those for the back-to-back lesions, for deeper lesions, or for situations where you're not breaking all your contacts and you're just trying to slide. You need a firm matrix band to slide through there, and you really kind of have to put a downforce on it. They're great for that too. And then the second configuration is the dead soft band, which are slightly thicker, and that's because they are coated with the Teflon tape, anti-stick material, and so that's the added thickness. But they're great for just single class 2s, non back-to-back situations, or cases where you have like an open contact and you're trying to reach out and touch that neighboring tooth. You're kind of building like a false contour anatomy. They're really wonderful for that as well.
yeah, you use that one when we do the course on closing open, naturally open contacts. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's they're really great for that because you need something you can kind of like form, and so they're pretty slick. Those dead softs they're special. I like them for those situations. So we gave you a variety, right? Because you don't know what you're going to run into. You're going to need a different matrix band for different situations. So you might as well have 2 different options in the kit. And so one of the taglines with this whole system is advanced design for complex cases. And like I was saying earlier, it's all about opening up avenues, opening up opportunities for us to be able to do more with directs, right? And we all want to. Crowns are great on the production side, but and I do a fair share of crowns. I was just telling Kevin like how many units I've done the last couple of weeks. I just got slugged with some big cases. But they're good on production, but they're also expensive, right? It's a lot of chair time, it's a lot of cost, and directs are just great. If you can do them efficiently, effectively, it's often one of the first things we do on people as patients, and it's like the confidence builder. It's just a great thing to have, but we often run into complications. And so the system was really designed with a few things in mind. And one was back to back restorations, deep subgingival or deep margin cases, and then those complex multi-tooth, restoration scenarios where you have a back-to-back and an MOD and things like that. And that was originally what it
Question
was
for you
designed.
here. Got a question for you here, Dr. Burton.
Yeah,
So, we've got the tagline, advanced design for complex cases, but patient sits down and it's a pretty basic MO or a pretty basic DO. You can still do that with this, right?
absolutely. And so through the clinical trials of this, and we didn't know where it was going to fall, right? And Kevin was there on that journey as well. And another part of the organic nature was that we didn't know if it was only going to be, kind of an advanced system for advanced cases, but we found that it had actually performed extremely well and excelled in those cases where other ring systems and things like that would struggle, traditional ring systems, simply because of its wedge ring synergy and the ability for all that to change. But what we ultimately noted was that a lot of the clinicians were actually coming back and saying, hey, this worked great for, like, really great for just a single class two, with minimalized flash and all of that. So that wedge ring synergy we were discovering is just really effective across the board, whether it's your basic class two or these more complex cases. And that's when we started to realize that we were onto something special, because it was helping us in every facet, right? In every place that we needed help. And so it's definitely a system that can be in your office and handle anything, is basically what we've discovered. All right. Kevin, do you have anything to add before I move on to the clinical case?
No, I think let's show them the whole
Let's
thing in
do it.
action.
And so this was a case that I shot with it early in its I guess finalized life. And this is something that I come across all the time. And so this is a young patient that came in, and he had a bunch of class twos done, and he was having trouble. He was getting food packed in between. They were done a few years ago, and he was getting food packed in there, and he was starting to get just high gingival inflammation. He was breaking floss. He promised me floss. Kind of believe him. I think if he went through all that work, he probably did now. But he had some failing restorations, and I look at this and I'm like, all right, we got to fix this. We got to start somewhere. So his biggest issues were on the top left, and it's an important thing to note when you see this case right here walk in, and you see the margins on those restorations and the overhangs and the contours and all that. And it's like, this is what this system was designed to help, right? Or to really get in there and take technique sensitivity down a little bit, and do some work for us, and allow the system to help prevent gingival margin overhangs or gingival leakage, and help improve contours and just kind of prevent situations like this from happening. And so I opened the preps, and of course, those overhangs and everything, just everything the tissue was upset. He was bleeding. So I tossed some Traxident in there, and that's like a hemostatic paste, Traxident. It's wonderful. You throw it in there, you have him bite on a cotton roll, and you leave the room for about 3 or 4 minutes. I recommend leaving because 3 or 4 minutes as a dentist is like an eternity. So I usually go back, grab a sip of coffee, come back, rinse it off, and I have a clean field now, right? I can see what's going on. I have a place to work. I'm not fighting everything. So in this situation, we have a back-to-back on the bicuspids here, and we have a single class two on the mesial of the molar. And the interesting thing you'll see, one of them, a couple of things. One is that there's a concavity here on this molar, and we all know that that little nook or that little concavity can be tricky to seal, and that's why you see the anatomical wedge coming in and doing its thing. And we'll show a better view of that in the next slide. And then in the back-to-back situation, we have our two firm bands, and then we just have a medium quad wedge. And the other thing that was a little tricky with this, that we forgot that part of it, is that if you look at the two margins here, they're on different levels, right? So the mesial of 12, or I'm sorry, the mesial of 13 is much more gingivally placed than the distal of 12. And that could be tricky for wedges to maneuver, but with the ability of the wedge to split and the wings to act independently, you're able to seal both those margins simultaneously, because you can see what happened last time. The distal 12 got sealed, but the mesial 13 got left open and overhang. Boom. You can actually trace the wedge that they used here, right? That's what happened. And so we have two uneven margins and a root concavity. So the system was really great in helping me with that. So this is a shot down. You can see that the convex nature of the anatomical wedge filled that root concavity for me, and that the splitting wedge here in this case went right in between those, and we have two sealed margins. And in this case, I ring stack because I want to get rings on everything right away to stabilize everything. And you can actually see, if you look close, you can see our little Versa wedge, or I'm sorry, quad wedge.
Oh,
It's an
shame on you.
old habits die hard. Old habits. The quad wedge wing is here, and you can see that it's splitting it. And if you look under the large ring, you can actually see the two wings of the anatomical wedge going in separate directions as well. And there's like a little trick to do that. You don't have to spread these rings out wide, super wide to find that. You just follow the embrasure and a little down pressure when you release, and that driver tip it'll just find that split and just boom, do it, and you're good. And so right now we have this set up. And so when I get into these situations, what I like to do is I like to work my way through. And one of the things with ring stacking is that this second ring often gets in my way of placing the more forward or the more anterior restoration. And so I'll place my more distal filling first and then take that ring off, right? But I don't take the matrix band off and I don't take the wedge out because I don't want to induce bleeding, right? So I want to keep my field clean. So those two things are kind of keeping the tissue in a chill space. And then we jump forward and you could see we have seal, contour, everything. And that driver tip is engaged right here. It's just like the shape of the teeth. And these things are so important because if you're able to recreate the restoration contour, shape, and everything during placement, then it's just going to save you oodles of time on the back end trying to clean all this up to get it to look like you want. And we all know how finicky that composite can be with the diamond burr. It's one jolt and it's messed up. And so in these cases, and whenever I do back to backs, I turn my class twos into class ones, build the wall first, cure that, and then finish off the occlusal surface. And this is immediately after I've removed both rings. And then this is after a brief polish. And if we go to the images or the x-rays, it's the cool thing about it is that recreates the contours, that we want, and nice flossable contacts, real clean margins in all areas, and confident, predictable, kind of just flow manner in doing these things. There's no unknowns. You can just kind of focus on what you need to do and keep yourself moving throughout your day and know what you're doing is great. And Kevin, do you want to take this part?
Yeah. So, we typically do a fair amount of testing before any of our product launches. Obviously, you got to get it out in the field and find out what's good, bad, and ugly, and do what you can to correct it and before you launch it. And this system, we've done 10 different systems now over the course of 26 years, and this one is by far the most tested system that we've ever introduced. Over 2,500 class twos, 800 of those back to back, and the results are very conclusive. Better marginal seal, reduced flash, the improved ability to do the back to backs. But there is just there's a little caveat. It is not the same. It's a little
Yep.
bit different, and so we've really invested a lot of time and effort before introducing this, which was just made available last week Wednesday, to get some materials prepped to help people out and just prepare them. I think it's most challenging for somebody who's really used to just shoving a wedge in there really hard and popping whatever ring the assistant hands you into place. This takes just a little bit of thought. You want to plan which direction you're going to wedge from. and which direction you wedge from is going to dictate which ring you put on. So just that few minutes of planning and understanding that there's an extra thought process can take what could be a frustrating experience and make it a lot more positive. So again,
Yeah.
tremendous amount of stuff that we've got ready. We've got cases from Dr. Burton, several other doctors, and these were just, these are people all over the world. We've had people from India to Spain to, you name it, have been working with this product now and really putting together some great stuff. And I think we've got one more here. We put, yeah, on the next slide, we've been working Dr. Burton pretty hard. Um, so he's like, there's all kinds of Q&A stuff out there in an actual demo, on Typodonts besides the case studies, just to, we really want to make sure that when people take this step and they want to advance their work, that we give them all the necessary support that we possibly can to make sure that they're super successful.
Yep. And I think that, when Kevin was talking about the testing of this and the prototyping and the retesting, and we did two big field tests on this, and we were two separate ones, and that was a bit unique. And the point of that was to really understand um, what people liked, what people didn't like, and iron all that out and make it as streamlined as possible. And we found that what the successes were of the system far outweighed anything else. And so the only thing was, just like Kevin said, there's just a small learning curve. It's just literally like a plan. Right when you get ready to start wedging and everything, you just have a plan, boom, boom, boom. And we developed these videos based on all the questions that we received, or the comments that we received, right, Kevin, in all those
Yeah,
surveys. And
yeah.
so we went to
Driven
town
by
on that.
clinicians. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
want
In
to make
fact,
sure that it's all out there.
so flip to the next one, Dr. Burton. This actually, we didn't plan it this way, but it worked out this way that we have we were planning on doing this course with Dr. Burton and Dr. Schmedding, one of our hands-on courses, which these things are just so much fun to do. And then it just happened to be that we got quad ready in time, right? So we actually have a chance for you to work uh, with this material with Dr. Burton. Dr. Schmedding is going to do the anterior stuff, but hey, why don't you tell them a little bit about what you got ready for them?
Yeah, no, Troy and we're if you're not familiar with Troy Schmedding, he's been in the game for a bit. He's a phenomenal cosmetic dentist out in California, and we met each other on the teaching circuit when I started getting into CE, and we became fast friends because we just had a lot in common. We're really practical, but we're like practical perfectionists, right? Like to our demise probably. But we like to have fun with it. We enjoy what we do. And so we were at like I don't know, probably sixth or seventh convention that we had been to together through our careers. And we're just sitting down and, having a beer. And he looks at me and I look at him like, we should just teach together. Like, this is fun. Like, what are we doing? And so we talked to Kevin, and Kevin was on board. And so and we kind of figured, like, what do people want to see? Right. So it's like, you want to be able to do really nice anterior work, really effective interior work, even in difficult situations. And you also want to be effective in posterior direct. So we kind of wanted to bring a mesh of both, right? So kind of a directs all around, right? Anterior and posterior, and and you're going to get a lot of info from two like everyday practicing dentists who are super practical, and there's no tricks or anything involved. It's going to be a lot of tips and a lot of good info on the things that we've learned through failure and success. And so it'll be a fun course.
Plus, you get to take it in the comfort of your own operatory.
There you go.
We're gonna send you a Typodont, not a cheapie either. These are these nice Kilgore Typodonts. You'll get some rings and bands and composite material, everything you need to do to be able to work along with the course, and you get to keep all that stuff. So this really isn't a sales pitch about the course. This is just saying that we do have this coming up, and so that if you want to take advantage of it, gosh, we'd love to have you. Course is half full right now, so I expect in the next 5 to 10 days we will fill it completely. So if you are interested, you want to register right away for that.
Yeah, we planned the course well before we knew quad was gonna hit
Exactly.
the ground, but
Yeah,
time
got lucky with that. So
we did.
yeah, so let's pop past this and I'm going to put my camera on here. Let's take a quick look at the actual kit a minute, and then we've
Sure.
got some nice time to jump into some Q&A here. So there's in the U.S., typical Garrison kit configurations. Um, the selection of bands that Dr. Burton talked about, the selection of wedges. There's some polishers and interior strips in there as well, and the forceps. But there's two kind of basic kit configurations. There's the intro kit that has one each of a left and right, and then there's the professional kit which has one each left and right in both the universal and the tall and the couple of extra instruments. And so actually the way that things have worked out is quite nice. The intro kit for quad is actually less than the intro kit for strategy. So
Yep.
that worked out really well for clinicians. And I'm going to pop my camera on. We'll take a quick peek at it here.
Do you
Let's
need
make
me to
sure.
do anything?
No, you can leave
Right.
it right there. So
Okay.
yeah, so this is what you get when you order a kit. Um, this is the card that we spoke of. It's laminated so you can kind of keep it handy in your operatory. It'll hold up nicely. It very clearly indicates the location, the recommended location of the rings. I see we already had a question about that. Again, that is a recommendation. There are cases where you're going to have a greater opening on the buckle or rotated tooth or something like that, that it is more conducive to place the driver tip on the buckle. So it is not a hard and fast rule, it's a recommendation. Okay, so then we've got our kit, we've got the forceps. Depending on the kit you get, don't be surprised if it comes with a couple of empty spots in it, right? The empty spots are for the other instruments in the professional kit. This is the base level kit, the intro kit that I talked about. So it has the ring forceps and a fun box with all of the goodies in here. And it always drives me a little nuts when you open these and it looks like there's like two matrix bands in there. And you pick them up and you drop them, and all of a sudden, oh, there's the 50 that they talked about. So don't worry, there are actually the correct count of bands in here. They just kind of nest together. But then, of course, the right and left driver tip ring. And then the tall rings are available independently if you want, or they are available in the professional kit. So just so you know that, yeah, it's a real life thing. It's ready to go. It's not just a CGI on the screen. We're shipping these out right now. But all right, I think we've got one more slide. And then while we leave this last one up on, I'll go through and start asking the questions. A lot of them have come up.
Sweet.
You keep flop down. Yeah. So we are, of course, if you do care to get a kit, we have a kit special for watching the webinar tonight. Just take a screenshot of that. You need that code WB225A. And if you order that intro kit, you'll get a free extra ring with that. All right, lots of questions here. Let's dive into these. These are going to be fun. All right. Yeah, Robert says, laugh out loud. My assistants hardly give me the right ring now. So, yeah, I get it. I get it.
I love
All
it.
right. So Whitney asked, so for doing back-to-back class twos, DO, MOD, MO,
Mhm.
you would use a firmer band. So when you want to fill both boxes at the same time, you don't get one over contoured. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
It just helps to hold that shape. Okay.
Yep. So
Let's
they hold their concavity on the inside or convexity on the outside. They won't dent each other. They'll kiss each other and create a contact area.
um let's see. Emily, great question. Can you use this with the previous generation Garrison rings?
The previous generation Garrison rings, you can use the wedges with the quad system. And so we get that question a lot. And so in certain cases, the fusion wedge, in a certain embrasure, like the fusion wedge is a great wedge. Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, I think she's primarily bleh, I can't speak. Primarily interested if she can use like the quad wedges and stuff with the freer with like strategy or fusion.
It's a little tricky with the strategy and fusion rings, the wedge itself. And so the ring and the quad ring and the quad wedge are really made to work together, but you can use the quad ring with fusion wedges and other wedges and just pull the tip, against the matrix band or push it in that direction. But the wedges are a little tricky to use with the strategy and the fusion rings.
Yeah, so I think ultimately um, the answer to those are yes, you can mix and match. However,
Yep.
you're not getting all the benefit that you get when you use them both together. That's really the first time we've been able to say that.
Yeah.
You know that it actually matters now that you use them together. So let's see. Rod asked, notice that on, I think that was on the where we had the three different cases up there that the driver tip was on, the buckle on those,
Paying
right?
attention. I like
Yeah,
it.
he was really
That's
watching.
correct. And so there's like we said, like I said, there's there's no there's no right or wrong. It was just a way to start to guide people and on how to use it, or just to give, because some people like cadence, right? They like consistency. They like the driver tip always on the lingual. Um, but this doc preferred to do it on the buckle. And there's a couple of pros to that at the beginning because it's easier to see the wedge from the buckle. So,
Sure.
it's easier to kind of, as you're getting used to the system, to put the driver tip on the buckle so you can actually find those splitting wings of the quad wedge a little bit easier than prior. And so it's kind of use it how you want or how the case deems fit, but we just created kind of like a road to follow.
All right. Daniel asks, what if both teeth are tilted towards each other? Um, back to back, but they're tilted
Mhm.
towards each other. How do you get a good contact without a food trap?
That's a great question. So in those cases, and there's going to be more courses coming up because not all back to backs are equal either, so some back to backs are, you can achieve bang bang, and that's something some of us are doing already, or others have been hesitant to do. This system allows you to accomplish things like what you see on the screen in the case that I showed, with simplicity in doing simultaneous back to backs. Now, when you get into extraordinary situations, and it's really easy to start to figure that out when you start to look for it, and clearly that doc has, is that when you have them tilting in, you're going to really need to create some faux contouring on those teeth to get them to contact here and not to contact here, right? And so in those cases, I will put two matrix bands in, and then sometimes I'll use, the dead soft in those really extreme cases, but only restore one at a time. I put both rings in, wedge, quad ring on top, and I'll restore one. And then I'll slide that one matrix band out, reapply my quad ring, and restore the other. But that would be, kind of one of those extraordinary situations that's difficult. But that's a great question.
Dr. Bird, do you primarily sculpt your marginal ridge areas versus rotary instrument?
Yes. So the great thing about the Garrison, even the firm bands, and especially the dead soft bands, they have a marginal ridge built in. And so when you pick your matrix band, just make sure that that marginal ridge is running right where it should be. So the matrix band does a lot of the work for me. And the way that the quad ring engages the teeth, it kind of gives that, it wants to bend the matrix band over and help fold that marginal ridge. And so a lot of what you saw was done by the rings themselves. I'm sorry, the matrix bands themselves. But I do like to pay attention to that. And it's very little finishing at the end. Most of this is built into how everything's set up and comes together.
Uh, let's see. Jose asks, are you burnishing the matrix bands if doing back to back?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I do always burnish just a little. I don't go crazy, but I always burnish just to make sure there's no irregularities. And so when I use my burnisher, it's kind of like an exploratory tool in a dark cave, to just make sure I don't feel like a dent or a ripple. And again, that's one of the great things about the firm bands is that they they hold themselves up. It's a very unique thing, and they feel firm and they feel like they should be thicker, but they're not. They're actually they're thinner than the dead soft. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but they hold their posture up. So it's definitely minimized the amount of burnishing that I've had to do. But I always like to just check and make sure that everything's nice and fluid, because how our matrix bands are formed is ultimately how our restoration is going to be contoured.
Well, these questions are coming in hot and heavy. Do you use flowable in the bottom of the box with a snowplow technique, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that answers that one. And then, oh, Whitney, I'm glad you asked this question. So, because it blew my mind when Dr. Burton was talking about this and telling us how he did his back-to-backs, because we never taught people to do it this way. But Dr. Burton, you're filling them simultaneously, aren't you?
I'm filling them simultaneously.
So you're etching both,
Yep.
bonding both,
Yep.
putting your flowable down in the bottom of both, putting in your increment of firmer composite in both.
In both. So this step here was done in one cure. So both walls built, cured once, and then material placed on the occlusal.
And I
And
think
again, when you
that
get into
is,
go ahead.
I was going to say, that's where you start gaining efficiencies.
Yep. And the thing is that even if you end up doing them, call it separately, the best thing we can do is to do to have a single etch and bonding step, because things get redundant, tiring when you're taking everything out and then you're rebonding everything. So I like to get my whole system set up, and this is what this system allows you to do. It allows you to get seals on both margins. You can get your bond in both teeth. And even if you're in those extreme cases, like the other doc was asking about the teeth that were tilted, where I'll restore one at a time. I have my bonding agent in both. Everything's ready to go, and I'll restore one, slide off the matrix band, and go back to the other. But this system allows you to get everything set up so that you only have one bonding step. But this case was shot in, this film, this bite wing just shows that was simultaneous back-to-back placement.
So, any issues with stacking two of the same color rings?
Um, that's a great question. And the answer is not always. It kind of depends on a variance of, it's more to do with the clinical crown, height on those teeth, but I have stacked blue on blue, and it's totally fine. And actually, the intro kit, to keep that cost down, we gave you one left and one right, because that's an important thing. We're concerned about cost of kits, but we give you one blue left and right. And I've always, I was talking to Kevin the other day, and it's like an additional pair of rings, of the blue rings would be a really good thing to have if you're doing a lot of quadrant dentistry, because then you have two lefts, two rights, and you can stack, and keep your driver tip on the same side at the whole time.
A couple of questions kind of along the same line here about using the quad wedges in the interior,
Yes, so
like
they are.
back to back class threes.
Yeah, no, I used the quad wedge today in an anterior case, and yeah, they work up there as well. They work really well, and so a lot of times I actually find myself wedging from the palatal more in the anterior. It seems to just the way the embrasures are built for the anterior teeth, and that's one little trick, is that you can get really effective use out of them, but usually from the palatal in the anterior. But they do work up there for sure.
Valerie, yeah, the hands-on course that we're doing, the kit is kind of a cut-down version of this. You get
Mhm.
one ring, the forceps. I think there's about 25 bands in there, wedges, composite bond, and the type and everything are all included. Let's see. So those couple of questions. Dan asks. Dan's busy here tonight. He's got a lot of questions for us. Do you if you see a gap in a deeper margin area, do you use any Teflon tape uh, wrapped on the wedge or packed in place?
You know, I typically don't have that problem with these wedges. If I land in like a really big embrasure space, I'll grab a fusion wedge and do it with that. But these wedges will seal a lot of that for you. But I know a lot of people love Teflon. My thing always was to figure out a wedge that would eliminate Teflon or me having to do something else. But if you just take Teflon and if you love it, just tuck it down in that lingual embrasure and let that quad wedge and quad ring come down on that, and I'm sure it would do what you wanted it to do.
So the Mark, the answer to your question is yes. The existing Garrison ring placement forceps work with the new rings. There is no change in the forceps. The matrix bands, he asked the same question. These are our existing firm bands and our existing dead soft. This is the fusion line of bands. No changes there whatsoever. So if you have those, you're already in a really good place, and maybe you just want to pick up some wedges and some rings.
Yep.
Let's see here. I lost my spot. There are just a million
Dan.
questions here.
I think it was Dan.
Oh gosh. Okay, so all kidding aside, great question, Robert. Are you still using your strategy rings, or have you switched over 100%?
I've switched over 100%.
Now, I tell you a story about that. Um, we were in Boston at the Yankee Dental Show last weekend, first show that we had this product at. There's one of our key opinion leaders around the country had received his kit of quad product on Monday. He shot 2 cases on Tuesday, 2 cases on Wednesday, put it in his presentation, and told his audience, "Yeah, this is my go-to now." So it is,
Difference maker.
there's no miracle cure. Okay, there's no magic pill. You still have to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to manipulate the materials and get them to work well in your hands. But yeah, that is certainly um, the intent here is that this is going to be able to replace that. Would you throw out your strategy rings? No, don't do that. Okay, because there are times when maybe that's just the exact thing to scratch that itch. You got to have some variety and some options. But I think once you try this, yeah, you're going to want to be consistent with what you're using in your office.
Yep.
Oh, let's see here.
Kevin,
Oh,
I've never heard you with so many questions. This is
I know.
hilarious.
It's like I'm trying to figure out which one I need to
Kevin's like,
fit
ah,
in. Well, and
what are
some
you
of
gonna
them,
do?
yeah, some of them have come in and we've answered them already through other ones. So you kind of got to filter through some of those things. So, uh, Dylan, great question here, Dr. Burton. Wide preps, right? So, still a use for the green wide prep ring out of Strategy Infusion.
Yes, sir. Anytime we have cuspal involvement, I would say past, wide prep to me, a lot of times is like a kind of a big wide amalgam. Quad works very well. Anytime you have cuspal involvement or, a missing palatal cusp or distal palatal on a maxillary molar, the wide ring is still a great tool for that, and nothing better.
So, a question for you here, Doc, on those types of situations. Um, with the nature of that ring, I mean, you're not going to try to do a back to back and that kind of.
No, that's a great question and a great point. No, in those cases, the back-to-back situations, you know, it varies, right? I mean, just like no class two is the same. And so if you have two gigantic lesions that are next to each other, like huge, where you would need to use something like the wide prep ring, it's probably best to do those, singular and just approach them individually, because that's a complicated case, right? You're heroic if you pull that off, and you're going to feel good about it. So, use it, it's made to help us be very streamlined, but obviously there's cases where we're just going to need to, take a step back and still accomplish greatness, but do it, one at a time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Dr. Burton, is that it's not, you know, clinician clinician judgment is by far trumps all. I mean, you've got to make that
Yep.
call. You're sitting there with the patient, and you've got to look at that case and go, yeah, I can do it this way. If there's reservations, then you got to go with how you feel about it. And
Yep.
question here from Carlos. So with this system, and you're using the firm bands for back to back, you're doing them both together, but you're not pulling one band out. You're leaving everything in place all the way until you're done, and you're taking the bands, the rings, everything out at the same time.
Correct. So again, when you look at this case, these are not, they look like wide preps, but they're not, right? They're not very wide. Just cleaned out the old composite, broke contacts. These are not humongous restorations, and I had really good isolation, really good access. And so in these cases, I always felt that there was no reason why I couldn't do this, back to back to back and crank it out in one. So in cases like this, when you see this kind of situation, it excels in these cases. Like that's the meat and potatoes of it. That's what it was built for. And you'll see here from this view, they're both still in here. Matrix band here, matrix band here. So everything is still in place. And so everything's done in one shot, because I try to keep everything as stable as possible. And when I was testing this, I wanted to put it through the gauntlet too, right? I'm not gonna, because if I tell Garrison it works and then we send it out and all the doctors say it doesn't, then that's a problem. So when I was testing it, I was putting it to the test, in ridiculous situations, and just seeing how it responded, because we wanted to develop something that truly, amplified this area of dentistry.
Gabrielle has a interesting question here that I hadn't thought of before. So sometimes, you got things in place
Hmm.
and you realize that maybe your wedge isn't as tight as you want. And so you've already got the ring in place, and she would slide out the old wedge and slide a new one in. Uh, what happens now? Is that
So that's a great question. If you feel that it's not wedge tight enough, you can take your ring forceps and just put them on the ring and just ease it open just a little. It doesn't take much, just a little, and then push push the handle of the wedge in, and then hold it in and release the ring. And so therefore you're engaging more of the body of the wedge, because it has many different shapes and architectures on it as it goes through. So you can very simply just ease the ring off and then push the handle of that wedge in further to engage it further, and that should get you what you want.
and this is of course, Dr. Burton won't let me in his office to work on patients, so I have to work on a tight one. So, but I
I'll hire
can,
you tomorrow as an associate, man. I'm busy.
yeah,
So,
I just got to get the degree first, right? So when wedging with a traditional, like a fusion or a strategy wedge, it feels very, very different than when you're wedging with a quad wedge. The
yep.
wedge feels like it's loose until you place the ring on, and the ring is driving those tips apart, and then that's what kind of tightens everything up together.
Yeah.
So when you're putting that wedge in, it's not going to feel, and that was a very common comment from all of the testers, thousands of cases that, well, the wedge felt really funky when I put it in, but once I got the ring on, everything was better, stabilized. So yeah, it's going to be different, and you have to be prepared for that.
And
All
use
right.
the biggest wedge that fits, as always. If it's wobbly in there and it's, loosey goosey, then that's not the right wedge. So it's just like, the familiarity with the fusion and strategy wedges. This is probably more closely related to the size of the fusion, right, Kevin, size wise, like as a
Yeah,
gauge.
yeah. Yeah, it's closer to that. I mean, the strategy wedges are those things are pretty darn
Yeah,
beefy,
they're
and
kind of wide.
yeah, that's a whole nother animal. Dr. Burton, could you flip to that last slide again? The one that's got the special on it.
Oop.
Dr. Lee's asking, yeah, we do have a special for you. It's if you want to get the full-on professional kit, just call us tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure if that code will work with the professional kit. You'd think it would. Just kind of an FYI, the intro kit's 650. The professional kit with the extra instruments and double the rings is 1,200, I think, something like that. So, we'll if you call us tomorrow, Stan, we can get you that extra ring for free with that. That's not an issue. I'm just not 100% sure if the website is set up to do that. The website's kind of finicky.
We didn't run that one through, right?
No, no. So Abe asks, so when you pull everything apart, are you zapping it again? You curing it again from buccal lingual or anything?
Oh,
Or
I love these questions. This is so awesome. So what I typically do is when I take everything apart, I always like to, before I take my wedge out or anything, I'll just take my matrix bands and break them free with an explorer, and then just bend them a little bit, and then nestle my curing light in there for 10 seconds
okay,
on each margin. I just like to do it. It's because there's sometimes you just don't know that it's getting all the way down there. And so I that's a great question, and I do that routinely. I've just made a habit out of it.
okay, yeah, I know a lot of people do it because the bands nowadays are longer and they wrap further around the tooth, and if you can
Yeah.
peel them back out of the way, you can get that light in there and just make sure there's nothing soft down by the margin before you pull them out.
Yep.
Yeah, that's always such a critical area. So one more question here. Can you do a deep class 2 with just pre-wedging and then after place the matrix and reuse the same wedge for a better fit, or will the wedge disintegrate? Not
Um, you
sure.
you can actually prep these. I know exactly what they're asking. You can prep these as a pre-wedge, and
Okay.
if you are pre-wedging with these, what I found, the better way to wedge them from, is the palatal, for maxillary molars, and then from the buccal for mandibular molars. But you can get the body in there, and and do your, prep the top off of it if you want to. But the real thing with this system is a lot of this system was designed to overcome that very necessity, right? So you may notice that after you prep a few out that you haven't touched your wedge too much, and that's because those wings are sitting, pretty low in there, and so that's one of the things that the system is kind of to help eliminate that requirement for preparation and wedging into those situations.
Well, that was a lively Q&A section,
It
and
was. Whew.
yeah, I just really appreciate everybody showing up here tonight and joining us for this. I think you are going to see so much of this product out there in the marketplace. We're already seeing, people who are, Instagram folks and out there on the lecture circuit really picking it up and running with it because it's really the first thing different on the market in 15 years.
A while.
So yeah, it's been a bit, and we have Dr. Burton to thank for really pushing us along here and advancing this product for everyone. So
And
thank you,
vice
Dr.
versa.
Burton.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, and the rest of the awesome Garrison team worldwide.
Oh, fantastic. Well, hey, everybody, thanks so much. And if there's any part you want to review, we will send out a link to the recording tomorrow. Again, it's not for CE credit tonight. And I hope you found that the Q&A session was helpful. It certainly is very fun for us to participate in.
Yeah, and if you guys have any other questions too, just reach out. So we're always here.
Awesome. Well, hey, Dr. Burton, thanks for a great evening here tonight. And, well, it's just a couple weeks. We'll see you in Chicago, right?
Yes, sir. We'll be
All
the
right.
winner.
So Yeah, if you're in the Midwest here, of course, the Chicago Midwinters are a huge show. It's probably the biggest one in the nation that we participate in there. We'll be there. Dr. Burton will be there. Um, we will have lots of these materials for you to look at and play with.
Absolutely.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Kevin. Thank you.